Yep. So my process is always this. The first thing I determine is how big of an issue is it, right? Is this is this catastrophic or is this mosquito in my ear, right? And you have to be careful here because you're paying a multiple of cash flow. Let's call it 3 to 4 times. So $100,000 issue can be $100,000 or $300,000 to $400,000, depending on whether it affects EBITDA or not, right? The first thing is you make an assumption, right? So it's um, it's a manufacturing company. Elliot's Amazing Widget Company. Manufacturing companies typically get paid in 45 to 90 days. I take an average of 60. That's probably their days sales outstanding. I run a model to see what that means for their AR. I'd use that as a basis for AR. And then during the diligence process, I would try to pull as many confirming data points as I could about that. So that's the first thing, is how big of a deal is it? Second thing is, can I get to some assumption that's close and then show it to the seller and broker? Oftentimes the data is there, Harrison. They just don't want to give it to you, don't want to dig for it, don't understand it, want to be tough. Life is life, right? The other thing, and this is where like diligence becomes so important, I can name you 2 to 4 documents that almost every business has that give you an indication of almost anything that's important in this deal process, such that it becomes almost laughable at times to not know, right? So, like AR, I talked to Grant about it. Show me all the invoices. I promise you, somebody in that company has the invoices. I don't, payables don't have them. Well, you're paying your people, you have payroll, they're going to get paid. What's the check amount, right? You got contractors, how much do you own, right? Somebody's cutting those checks as well. What other, services and whatnot do you pay? Your credit cards are going to show that, your bank statements are going to show that. That stuff is going to be there. What's another one that I see a lot? Um, customer, customer list. Everything's a round number. If you have QuickBooks, there's always a customer list in QuickBooks. If you have Peachtree software, there's always a customer list. If you don't have those things, the bank statement typically has Coca-Cola paid you, Pepsi paid you. It'll say it on the bank statement. So Harrison, we can talk more, but most of these things, the data is there. It's just not readily available. It's not part of their initial packet. Let me take a further step back because I think this will be relevant for a lot of you guys. Most of the issues I see in diligence have a huge ability to be improved if you think about who each person is in the process. And what that means is, how do they get paid? What do they actually know? What's hard for them? And like, what do they typically do? Now, typically do is going to take some muscle memory. But if you think about the seller is typically a high school graduate, maybe a couple years of college, that had the gumption to go start something. The stuff that he was doing worked. Money started coming in. He hired people. He probably doesn't, or she probably doesn't like finance all that much. Think it's a waste. Thinks bankers are scoundrels. Um, does the bare minimum to produce financials, and is also potentially the smartest person in most of the rooms, even though they might not have all the PowerPoint slides we like or the financial models we like. So you think about who that is. The broker has no agency or sort of no long-term skin in the game. He puts buyer with seller, gets paid when they consummate. He wants you to think the deal is great. He wants the bare minimum amount of data that you need to chew on to make a decision. Although he likes it if you spend a lot of time on the deal, in between just enough time and like medium a lot, he's going to get uncomfortable because the more data he has to present, the more work he has to do. It's a fixed percentage of the deal size. So you're doing $1 million deal, he's going to get 10% or so. So when a broker says they don't have it, you got to consider how much can you trust that. The other thing that happens is that the controller or the bookkeeper in these businesses and how the financials usually work, So we talked about the seller is typically a person that's not financial, that's an entrepreneur, doesn't even like finance typically. Their bookkeeper can go from wife, girlfriend, someone in that weird town that knows how to count well, no one at all, right? And so oftentimes the owner does the business, the bookkeeper puts stuff in something, and at the end of the year, they send all of that something to an accountant. And the accountant is supposed to be the checker of stuff. But when you pay an accountant $1,200 a year, I'll tell you right now, they don't check anything. So they take the garbage in, they put the garbage into forms. They say, hey, you owe $500 of taxes, and that's it. So now you come 20 years later and you're like, you know what? I'm going to talk to the CPA about this business because they know. You got to recognize they're never going to tell you I don't know. Like nobody's going to get you on the phone and say, hey, Harrison, like, man, they sent me a bunch of receipts January 15th. They don't really pay me a whole lot. I throw them into my system. I shoot it out. So when you're thinking about the questions you're asking as it pertains to data, think about who would actually know, because sometimes the question needs to go to the CPA because it's a technical question. Sometimes it needs to be the bookkeeper because they had to put it in the system. And sometimes even the bookkeeper might tell you the process they use to put something in. The owner is actually the one that knows. Hopefully that was somewhat helpful.